Good morning, everybody. Hello, everyone online. Welcome back to day number 2. We're going to kick it off with this keynote panel. Now, I think you know what we're going to talk about as we see on the title slide here on the screen. But first, I want to do some quick intros for everybody. 3 of the 4 speakers, if you attended yesterday, you've already seen before. I'm going to start all the way down on the end with Bailey Bercik, and she is at Microsoft, 4-time now speaker here at CloudSecNext. Has been on the product side for many years and then now focused on threat intelligence. So welcome, Bailey. And then we've got Shaun McCullough. Now, Shaun works at GitHub. You heard from him yesterday. And technically, I guess he works at Microsoft as well. So we have a lot of great Microsoft representation here. And Shaun is a cloud security architect, former NSA for many years. And he's a co-author and instructor of SEC 541, our cloud security threat detection class. Then we've got John Zeolla right here in the middle, who you heard from yesterday as well. John is the founder of Zenable, building AI guardrails, and previously also started a company called CISO in the cloud native security space. He teaches our SEC 540, cloud security and DevSecOps automation, as well as the brand new SEC 545 Gen AI and LLM application security class. And then, of course, we've got Terrence Williams right here to my left. And Terrence has been all over the place. He's worked at AWS twice, worked at Google, worked at Meta twice, now at Meta, right? Yeah. And did cyber operations in the Marines and is also an instructor for our Forensics 509 Cloud Forensics and Incident Response class. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thank you. Thanks for the warm introduction. Now, of course, I've got a lot of questions for the panelists, but I want to make sure anybody online, I'm watching Slack here. So if you have any questions online, feel free to chime in. Anybody here in the room, and actually anybody here on the panel, if you hear something from the other panelists and you've got a question that you'd like to ask your fellow panelists, feel free to chime in as well. We want to try to make this as conversational as possible. But we're going to go ahead and start with the first question here. We'll start with John, since you're right in the middle.
Okay.
John, what do you think AI does really poorly in the cloud today, but won't do so poorly for long?
What do I think does really poorly in the cloud today? I think a lot of things. I think that AI has a massive slop problem and a hallucination problem today, but I don't think it will be that way for forever. I think that some of our context engineering and RAG systems will bring more of the correct context to these systems. And I don't want to put a time frame to it, but I could imagine some point in the future, less than 5 years away, probably maybe even less than a year away, where that gets not perfect, but like significantly better. Fingers crossed.
All right, great. Terrence, what about you?
Ooh, okay, so what does it do poorly? Understand what we want. So like, I have a general LLM calling Bedrock, calling OpenAI, and I say, go analyze my law. And it does it. It goes analyze it, but similar to what John says, it doesn't always have context, and I'm not explaining things. As we're seeing with like the latest reasoning models, the agent behavior is taking my limited context and going to get better and say, all right, step 1, here's what I think they're saying. Go get my context. Okay, let me enrich that a little more. All right, let me go look at the law from the schema. Okay, I now know what you do. So over time, it's going to get to that point where it's, hey, go analyze this for incident X. All right, I built a playbook. I know what you are intending to ask me for. Here's your results. Next step.
Great. Bailey.
I would say building off of what Terrence mentioned and adding on to some of the hallucinations, making sure that information is accurate. Because especially when we're thinking about security and what we're looking at making decisions on, the importance of making sure that that information we're getting is accurate for us to make a decision is critical.
Shaun, you know where we're going next.
Yeah,
right to you.
for me, right? Okay. Yeah, I think one of the problems with like the generalized LLMs is that you're asking this question and the LLM doesn't really know anything about you or the contract or anything like that. It's just like coming up to somebody on the street and asking a random question. They just don't know where it's coming from. I think in the cloud provider, especially in platform and software as a service, they're going to get much better at understanding why you're asking the question, like what your job is, what the mission is or what the product is doing, and be able to give you much more specific answers. I'm looking forward to those cloud services providing those APIs that allow you to ask questions and understands the history, understands what you've given it before, so it can give you a more tailored context.
Shaun, we're going to stick with you. You know, I probably should have started with the positive, not about, hey, what should AI be doing in the cloud? It's more like, hey, what is the best thing, the most impactful thing that you found that AI is doing for you today?
Oh,
yeah,
that's
at work,
a good question.
in your personal life, even, you know, there's a little debate, right?
Yeah. I will say, so working at GitHub, we're using Copilot in GitHub a lot. We use GitHub for like ridiculous things that people should use GitHub for. We're testing out the product all the time. And one of the things I really like about it is the ability to say, all right, I'm going to create an issue to go and change some code, and it doesn't have to be anything major. And I can create the issue and I can say, just go do it. And not only does it change the code, which I could have done myself and have been fine, but it documents what it's doing and why it's doing it so much better than I ever would. And when I started seeing that happen, I was like, oh, in like 5 years, when someone goes and comes back and goes, why did we do that? You can see much better information. Yeah. Sometimes when I go look at history of applications, or what we do is we build and run our security program using GitHub as for the check-ins and all that kind of stuff. And I can see why we made changes to CI/CD pipeline because of that documentation. I really like that. So it's not so much the code that changes it, it's something I couldn't do, but the context and all the descriptions around it is so much better.
Yeah, the context. John, you mentioned the context, not prompt engineering, but context engineering.
Yeah. Because it understands the repo, and so it looks at the repo, and so it's very much able to focus on that. Yeah, especially if I give it, especially if you did a good job writing the repo. So it's not like a bunch of spaghetti code. Then it gets confused. It's like, I don't know what you want to do. But if you kind of lay it out really well, it does a pretty good job. Yeah. But the documentation, I love it.
May I build on that? So I am naturally introvert. I know it looks weird because I'm up here speaking in front of people, but having conversations with people is sometimes difficult. Like one of the quotes I've always had, people get upset if they don't know the answer. So you ask a lot of questions like I do. You don't always have someone who's always responsive. AI in the various situations that Shaun is saying, like, I don't understand why someone did this. Please go through, explain this to me. I still don't get it. Explain it different. Hey, how do I make this way more efficient? Because I'm using all of our compute resources that it's costing me millions of dollars. And AI comes back and it's my intern. I got treated as such. You may have graduated from all the top schools in the world and have a PhD in every single degree program, but you don't know what I want. So when I'm like, hey, I got this ticket, no one put enough details in it. Can you go tell me all the other things they've made tickets about and what have they complained about? Can you go look at our chats? Break this down for me. And it helps me now have a better understanding versus going to annoy someone with 50 questions. Okay, did you restart? Did you start?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I love that. Actually, one of the things I'm looking forward to, surprisingly, is like these models are made to be helpful today. I'm actually looking forward to them to have a little bit of hesitation, right? And to maybe like ask questions back. I think we've started to see this in some of the different chat models, but if it's purely focused on helping you, it's gonna make a little bit more assumptions. And I kind of love like your scenario where like, give me additional context. And like, yeah, great, I can give you more context. But what do you mean by that? Do you mean, other tickets that have existed? Do you want me to also look at outages or incidents? Do you want me to look at, what types of categories of information? Because then when you start having that conversation, you might find out that the bot doesn't have access to data you thought it did have access to. And so when it's helping you, there's like a gaping hole, but like you're not going to know that until it starts to kind of give you a little bit of feedback or even ask questions back at you. So it almost becomes like a bidirectional conversation.
And since you mentioned what it has access to and what it doesn't, I think I'm really excited about the day when it's able to look at, the permissions that it does have. And I feel like a broken record because every year I come up here for the past 4 years and I've talked about reducing permissions and cleaning that up and the governance of it all. But I think that when we look at what it all has access to and what we can trim down to make sure we're truly least privileged with some of our AI apps, that I think will be really powerful in conjunction with everything it can already do, but making sure it's being done safely.
Did y'all catch that? They all said a number of very key important words. There was hesitation, permissions, and really what it's boiling down to is trust. And what's the amount of trust that you're going to put in to these various systems? If you're treating it like a colleague, if you're treating it like an intern, you got to trust the fellow colleagues. So what's it going to take? We'll start with you, Bailey. What's it going to take to trust these AI systems to make security-related policy decisions, enforcement decisions going forward? What's kind of that typical process look like from training all the way to trusting?
So I think the part there that I'm very excited about is the looking for patterns of use. And so if we're looking at trends over time of what permissions are being used or what users are doing and being able to identify those anomalies, in terms of making policy changes, if it could be aware of that seasonality and be able to look at things that a human may not be seeing of what can we truly scope down to create like a bespoke least privileged role for an administrator or a user. I would be hesitant though for anything that would be like a approval by AI. I know I've seen some things like startups and stuff out there talking about like auto approval and whatnot. And I think that that's something that may take a while for me to personally trust or look into, but I'm really excited about the revocation and taking away and cleanup and all that boring stuff that I know identity and security teams aren't really rewarded for doing that boring cleanup work, but it is very important. So I think that'll be very helpful.
I feel like it needs to prove it to us, right? Like we need more evidence. And the way that we're going to get more evidence is having more data, and the way that we're going to get the right data that we need is the time needs to pass, right? I think that something in the short term is going to be actually like gathering information about did it kind of like an audit mode, right? Like what would it have done in this scenario, and then did that end up being the right decision? And other sorts of interesting data points and evidence that we don't even know to ask right now, but starting to gather more and ask questions of that data, evolve over time, and then it needs to prove it to us. Like we need to be able to see with hard facts that, you know, that it's worked really well over the last 2 months, but then you said seasonality, right? Like what about last year at the same time and other sorts of patterns that we can't imagine? What if a third-party activity, some event occurred, and how we respond to that, you know, in the news? Like that's a very dynamic thing that'd be very hard to prove or evidence, and I think we'll only know those things in retrospect. So starting to gather data, looking at it, and having it kind of prove to us through the data, I think it's going to be big.
I would jump on that because I do not want an AI to automatically do an automated response action. Maybe I'm too old. I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I'm okay with it. But I do like the fact that it might have a bunch of data in different kinds of formats that I want to feed into a decision maker system, right? And right now you have to go and take that data, you have to translate it into some kind of JSON or something, and then have an application understand the data. Whereas with AI, I don't have to change the data format. I can have AI go and kind of figure it out without doing a lot of data normalization. And I think that's where I'm excited about AI going. It's not so much automatically making a change, but also automatically saying, hey, can you go tell me about all these logs? And do you see this detection? Do you see this IP address and this in all these different logs? And not having to predefine exactly what the schema is, letting the AI system kind of understand it from the context. That's actually where I wanted to go for that automation.
See, unfortunately, I'm on the opposite side of things. Like, I want to get to what y'all are describing. I work in incident response and forensic. So my problem is people. My problem has always been people. So AI can do these amazing things, but you still have unfiltered, overprivileged IAM roles. So why am I focused on AI when my environment is still unsecure? You still let SSH open to the world, but let's go worry about AI. So how can we trust it? Treat it like it's part of the team. Yes, I agree with you. No, you don't get to automatically submit anything. You can go do a pull request. You can go get your 2PR. You can go through my IAM roles and tell me what's over permission. You can then come back and give me recommendations. But you're right, we can't trust it yet, but we're not doing the right introspection of where are we currently at? Like most of our multi-cloud environments, they're just pieces put together and no one understands them. But yet we're like, all right, let's launch AI with it. Well, guess what's going to happen? AI is going to do what AI thinks. And since we still don't understand it, it doesn't actually get us. So like, how do we get to trust it? How do you make my team better? What did you spot? All right, you figured out that we have all these unused roles and permissions that no one's using. How do you correct it? Then come back and give us training. Here's what y'all have done. Here's what we can improve. So the trust is going to be like I trust any other person who comes in my environment. What can you do to make me better? And that's where my trust is going to be. I want to see my team grow, not just throwing more at AI.
What is the summary of what everyone just said? What they said was, hey, don't rely on AI theater. What does that mean? A lot of companies are saying, hey, well, we need AI. Senior leadership is saying, we need AI. And if you just try to do some Gen AI stuff, well, it's not going to work unless you build it into your business processes, your team processes, unless, like Terrence just said, you've got some outcomes in mind of what that person, virtual person, is going to do. Now, we know that there are vendors, as was mentioned, big and small, that are working on improving automating security across a number of areas, but starting a lot with SOC, with your analysts, with your threat analysts, with your vulnerability management, and so on. I know many security teams, and I want to ask you what examples you've seen. Many security teams, the good ones, are rolling out AI by having that virtual intern, if you will, that virtual teammate that Terrence has mentioned, but they don't just let it run wild. They don't auto do anything, but then they compare the results from the real person, the real SOC analyst, to the AI analyst. And then, hey, we know where this is going. They take the output. If there's a deviation, then they use the real person to augment, train the AI, or vice versa. And then they measure it over time. But they don't necessarily rely on that to do the most advanced things. Then they do that for some of the basic playbooks, like basic malware response, for example. What examples have you guys seen in terms of your organizations or other organizations? Shaun?
Yeah, I'll say this is something we're just starting to do. If you saw a talk yesterday, my talk, we kind of work on how to better deploy security guardrails and security findings inside of our environment. And one of the things that we realize is that we have all this documentation that we've written that describes what we want teams to do from a security standpoint. And then we have our repo that has Terraform that's deploying the security controls. And the humans are writing both, and they don't always keep them up to date. So we've been using Copilot to analyze the Terraform and then compare it to what our documents that are written and identify anything that we maybe have skewed from, like we've kind of drifted. And it's done a really good job of highlighting problems. It's also done a really good job of telling us when we spell things wrong, which I guess is important too. But and it was like there was a lot of spellings, and that was my fault. But anyways, but yeah, being able to like look at code and then compare it to human readable documentation and be able to tell us where we got kind of problems, it's actually working really well. And so that's how we're using it to help us just kind of keep things in better control. Yeah.
Mentioning the documentation bit, I know in yesterday's talk, Lydia Grassley spoke about using AI to summarize lots of documentation. So when we think about folks that are perhaps new to security teams, or when a security team is tackling a new challenge and you need to quickly ramp up on something, whether it's a tool or information you're learning, being able to leverage that for those teams to get that summary for training is really key.
Yeah, I really like the fuzzy comparison use case, right? So you have like some baseline information, maybe it's documentation, maybe it's code, and you're kind of comparing it to something else. Generally, I see that happening a lot where you have some sort of requirement, and it's trying to provide evidence that you're meeting a requirement and that the requirement is actually necessary, right? I feel like that's really important, and something that we sometimes lose track of in security is, we've got these requirements, but like, why are they there in the first place? And do they apply to this current situation? I've been finding AI not do it perfectly, but like really improving, connecting the dots in those sorts of scenarios.
For me, it has been root cause analysis. Like being in a SOC environment is just brutal. Like you getting alerts. So AWS, we have our internal team, all of the world, every service. You can only imagine how many things we get in. Who knows everything? No one. No one knows everything. So the person who wrote this playbook or this run book, they had just a small glimpse. Well, the AI comes in and says, no, I took all your incidents. I took all your code base. I'm taking all your write-ups and saying, hey, here's actually where you need to go focus. I know we were going and doing X, Y, and Z in the past, but this is the root cause. Fix this and you'll get faster and better. And that has distilled down terabytes and petabytes of data to say, focus, look here.
We have a lot of questions online. And then if anybody has a question here in the room, feel free to raise your hand. We'll run a mic over to you. And let's just kind of go through some of these here. One is related to Copilot, but this is really any tool that does a similar thing. We'll start with John here, because this is related to what you talked about with vibe coding, is what's needed to make Copilot produce secure code, and what are the risks, other risks for large organizations using similar tools?
Yeah, I think the context engineering, right? Like you need to tell it what you want. That will likely look like some sort of a specification or a requirement, but you need to ask correctly. And that's really hard. That's something that I fail at all the time. And actually, I'm trying to use AI to help me ask the right questions to AI, right? You can see how this kind of like builds on itself. To some degree, that'll make things a lot better. That's not going to get things to 100% though. It's still a stochastic system. And so that means that not only do we need to provide better information going in, but we need to better validate the information coming out. So finding ways to check the outputs. And again, we can use AI tools to check the AI outputs. It's called LLM as a judge. It's a very common technique, but you can use deterministic tools as well. If it's going to be a structured format, if it's a markdown file, if it's JSON, blob, YAML, whatever, if it has some sort of a schema that you can validate, you can start validating that. And really that just goes back to traditional tools that we've been using forever, linters and checkers, validators, things along those lines. And then like kind of building on top of that, like policy as code and guardrails and slightly more dynamic things. And those are deterministic. That's great. It's a really beautiful solution. It's super fast, but it's not going to have perfect coverage. And so that's where the LLM as a judge, also kind of in parallel helps a lot.
Yeah, I would say, I think the AI systems do a pretty good job of identifying that this line is written insecurely. So in our class, we have a command injection against Lambda, and Amazon's code guru identified that this is a command injection attack, gave us really good context about it. It was really kind of cool to see that. But when you start kind of bringing in bigger systems and there's a vulnerability because of the way the systems gets put together, it's much harder for the AI system to be able to understand that this is a problem. I think it's just similar to a junior developer that doesn't have a lot of experience in big systems. They can see the individual lines, it's probably not good, but when you put it together, it's going to require somebody else to look at it. So I think as the AI systems get better and better, you might see it improve, but I think larger systems put together, vulnerabilities about way it's deployed, I think it's hard for the AI system to understand. I wouldn't trust it at that level.
We got a couple questions here related to metrics and telemetry. Now, Majed asked, hey, we need to, of course, differentiate or tag between a person, a human, versus what AI is doing. We've been talking about to do the comparison, but then have you seen any benchmarks or anything in terms of, hey, well, what percentage should be AI generated code? And then separately, what telemetry should we be capturing from these various AI tools to analyze what it may or may not be doing?
I could take a first stab at that one. I treat it like I treat everything who's doing code. I don't really go off of how much AI should do versus a human. I say, who wrote better tests? Are you having tests to make sure it's not breaking, it's integrated? But when it comes to the metrics and the AI, log every component. What was the model? What was the prompt? What were the inputs? What were the systems they got? Where did it read the data from? What was the response? Every single time. It sounds very hard here when we're just saying it, but in the cloud, that's how it's supposed to be. Like, we can log everything. But how do you go back and verify what happened throughout the whole thing? And then that goes back to like green, blue, A/B testing. I did model A versus model B, and which one was more accurate, all those things. But how can I always see everything? It's more of a mindset.
I think the percentage of outputs that should be AI is a really hard question to answer because they're really verbose. They like to say a lot, right? They kind of like spew information at you. So that a good thing? Is that what we should be using in our metrics? There's sort of like other more difficult metrics to come by, like quality, right? Like, is it well designed? Is this like good quality and things like that? And then that would feed the percentage that would be appropriate. And then, taking into account like service level agreements and objectives and indicators and things like that, like how fast you need to move, what sort of environment you're in, your regulatory requirements, what evidence you need. Very complicated question, I think, to answer. Very messy.
Any questions here in the room? So the comment/question is, we know these LLMs are not deterministic. They don't necessarily always give the exact same response. It says something today, it says something slightly different tomorrow. Now, the model providers are working on this, that depending on the use case, trying to make their models a little bit more deterministic or consistent, I should say. So I think the question is, well, hey, how can we rely on that if that is the case?
I have a spicy take on this. Do we want that? Like, because isn't that a part of like the value of AI and large language models, is that it thinks creatively and it's got this like percentage distribution of the token creation? you can do that in a lot of cases, right? You can change the temperature of a model and force the inputs to be in a certain way and get reproducibility, but it's a trade-off, like everything. And so I think one of the first things I think of whenever I hear that question is like, is that actually desirable for this situation? Because it might be desirable for many situations, but it's probably not going to be desirable for every situation, right? And so, like for instance, if I wanted to write some sort of code, I might give it the exact same input and generate it 5 times on purpose, and then have an LLM judge it or a human judge it to see which one's better, and we can kind of have a competitive system. But if they're all going to come out exactly the same, then I get no value there. But if I can actually have these like dynamic outputs, then I can more likely find the best of breed outcome. And you of course you could say like a deterministic system, which is really well tuned and trained, might give you the best output right off the bat. I just don't think that's where we're at right now. And so I think that having these differences in output is actually a very good thing. If it's not a good thing for a given scenario, that's where I think either augmenting or moving it to determinism. So you could do something like, I often will use an AI tool to write something deterministic and then use the deterministic thing in a reproducible environment. Like, it's very common with policy as code and things like that. And so that could be a way that you can get the same sort of output, but use AI. But again, you ask it 5 times, it might give you 5 different deterministic outputs to run later, and you have to figure out which one is the best. So, tricky.
I add something. So one of the things that I see gets confused is like the surface we're talking about. If you're going to Claude.ai or whatever thing you're doing, and they're giving you this black box solution, they're hiding a lot of configurations that you can control. In the cloud, when I'm talking to Bedrock, Vertex AI, or OpenAI, I'm able to do temperature settings where say, you don't get to be that creative. I'm able to say top P 0.0 every single time, same exact thing. But to John's point, what is the system for? And this one job for this one agent, this one job for this one thing, and break it down as simple as possible versus like the chat bot, which is trying to be more relatable, trying to be human readable. I can have an AI that just says, your only thing you're giving me is JSON. Do not give me words, do not give me your opinion. JSON out. And it's just a strategy behind it.
I think that's an anti-pattern right now, is the one tool to do everything, the one AI to do everything. Like we have, ChatGPT has a lot of popularity because it can do a lot of different things. Maybe we don't want that. Maybe in an actual, company where you want a little bit more determinism, you have lots of fine-tuned or specially trained models, or you have specific settings or context or prompts or things like that to constrain it a bit.
Yeah. If the ideal use case, one of the ideal use cases is to treat AI like an intern or a team member. Hey, do we want the intern or team member saying the exact same response for every single situation? Maybe we do for a week or a month, but then as that person learns, if you will, in their career, well, maybe a year or 2 years, 3 years from now, hey, it should be a different response, like is being said. So it really depends on the use case. I want to go down to Bailey here. Bailey, if you put on your product security hat here in the audience, people online, all working in various security teams at various organizations, what should they be thinking about in terms of the internal enterprise AI security products that they should be using and building out? Maybe not just buying off the shelf. How would you approach this for all of these security leaders, engineers?
Ooh, that's a really good one. In terms of thinking about, well, first of all, buying off the shelf, Microsoft has a lot of great, offerings there. But I think when we're thinking about building something bespoke, I really am going to lean back on, revocation and what we're able to look at seasonality. So I know we had a conversation about that earlier, but if you think about use cases like the busy season for your organization, or perhaps something for your industry, like if you're in retail, holiday season comes up, perhaps there's use cases that may be beneficial to leverage AI for that, could be helpful for predicting certain patterns of, allowing access to things or enabling users to perform certain actions. The same thing could be for financial firms during tax and audit season or whatnot. When we're looking at that seasonality or something that may be a unique business case for you, I think that could be very powerful. But again, going back to either predicting those patterns, giving information for an employee to then make a decision on, or revocation at the end of the day.
Good example. Any other questions in the room? Any other questions in the room? A lot of questions already came in online. Shaun, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. And it's to do a little bit of fortune telling, if you will. So it's related to somebody that's online asked a question, is how long, in the last 6 to 12 months, you've seen a huge change in the capabilities of the various models with agents and so on, and things are moving fast. Shaun, how long do you think that it will take to replace a threat analyst?
Oh, that's a spicy question. I don't, I would say never. I don't think it'll ever replace a person in that case. I mean, I think of it as a tool. And so if I buy a really nice hammer, it's not going to replace everything I do. I just got a better hammer. I can maybe do my job better. I consider that they'll be more and more involved in providing the human that kind of information. But from a threat analyst, Terrence was talking before, the threat analyst now is spending a lot of time combing through a bunch of data. That maybe we don't need to do anymore. Maybe the AI system can comb through us and provide us that summary report. And that's where I kind of see it going. I don't see it really replacing a threat analyst, never.
I actually compare this a little bit in my head to like computer hardware and like video games, right? The hardware got faster and faster and faster, but are things happening instantly? No, because the computer games and systems are asking for more. They're taxing the system more. They're making things higher resolution, or they're doing more. And I think that companies are just going to start expecting more outputs, and the AI is going to kind of like augment that. I don't know exactly. I wouldn't take as strong of a stance on it as you would, that it would never happen, or how it will happen, or when it'll happen. But I do expect that companies are going to expect more output, and it's going to kind of force augmentation of AI in these sorts of scenarios. It might scale together. It might be a little offset. I'm not sure.
Any other questions in the room? Another important topic here. Oh, your hand in the back. Repeating the question for everybody online, we've been talking about, hey, how do we use AI to help us analyze data better, write some code? What about maybe the bigger picture things in terms of reviewing the network architecture, thinking about the design, maybe related to threat modeling as well?
All the time. The reason is we have to separate what are we good at versus what computers are good at. So for example, computers are great at automating. They're great at just doing the same thing over and over again. We, as human beings, we're not. If you want an example, if I tell you stand up 15 times and sit down, probably after round 2, you're going to start thinking about how you do it. So think about what don't we do well. Audits. We are horrible at auditing ourselves. It already comes as a structure. Turn the structure, as John was saying, into code. So if I'm looking to pass my NIST 800.53 audit as code, the LLM can understand that and then takes it back in your code base that you also deployed as code. Where are open security? Where am I overprivileged? Where am I doing these negative things? And also then you could turn it into applications. Here's the application based off what you evaluated. Now I have a Graph API client that's always just going to keep running. Every single time someone spins something up, evaluate it. Is it wrong? Yes, no. If it's wrong, open a ticket to me so I can go ahead and get it. So all the time, I give it those things because there's no question behind, should my infrastructure be secure and should I be passing the audit? Since that's not questionable, it can do a great job.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what we want and the AI is aligned to help us is to get better, right? Continuous improvement. I think it's again, these LLMs are very generic, flexible. And so I am expecting them to focus more, maybe with specializations, agent specializations in different domains, like you're saying, network architecture, threat modeling, whatever, but generally focusing on continuous improvement, whatever that means, and maybe even having agents that just help you pick which is the area to improve first. What's the quick wins? What's the easiest scenarios where you can improve in your environment, perform threat modeling and risk assessments, and then just pick 1 or 2, and then actually get that the whole way to, I've done a lot of risk assessments of threat modeling. And what frustrates me the most about those processes is not fixing the worst problem quickly and spending too much time racking and stacking and figuring out what to do next. So I think that these tools and agents will push us to continuous improvement across a whole company, sure, security, but really like the whole business efficiency as well. And I think to best be equipped to respond to that on the security side, I think we need to be super focused on the ability to change, right? The ability to update how we do things in lots of small pieces with feedback loops and ways to validate that it was a good decision or not, going back to kind of the data thing, how can we have evidence that we're going in the right direction? Because continuous improvement, it's not a straight line, right? Like you're going to make mistakes and it'll be messy. So data is going to kind of get us there.
You guys familiar with the annual State of DevOps report that's been published for the last dozen-ish plus years? And that's not a security specific report, but just like in security, if you're in the industry, you kind of have to read the annual Verizon DBER, the M-Trends report, and so on. If you're in DevOps, you kind of have to read the State of DevOps report. The reason I mentioned it, because a common theme here is that they point out all the data that they've looked at for over a decade, that the best teams aren't the ones with the best performance. The best teams are the ones that have the best improvement over time. And AI, what everybody just said, is that it's helping us improve faster. Any other questions in the room? Any other questions online? Oh, in the back there?
So thinking about and thinking about yesterday's talk about threat modeling AI, it definitely left me feeling a little unprepared for what kind of telemetry I should be capturing from these AI systems. Are there new forms of telemetry that I'm not already capturing? Probably that I should be.
Probably.
Most likely.
Most likely what it is. Yeah, I have no idea. I think it's very interesting topic. I think gather everything, see if it's useful, start throwing things away and iterating on what you gather. What is useful might actually be completely independent given scenarios, companies, et cetera. I'm sure that maybe at some point there will be like kind of a baseline where we generally agree these 15 things that are somewhat new to be gathered.
Are you speaking about like LLM systems, like the telemetry from those systems, or using LLM to gather info from other places?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like, I think about, you have, a good standard for network security is to capture things like flow logs
Right, okay,
or things like that. But, I think internally at my organization, we're building a lot of different AI tools, and we're kind of just capturing what's already there. We're capturing our IAM events, we're capturing requests and our load balancers.
Yeah, but those are things going outside of the system, right? Yeah, I don't think the current LM systems do a great job of exposing exactly what they're doing underneath. I don't think they're great. Hopefully they'll get better. I think using some of like tools like Amazon and Azure, they all have these systems help you build LLM systems that are customized, and then you can craft that to provide as much telemetry as you want. I think that if you need a lot of data about what's happening, especially if you're going to have it automate some kind of automated response action, you probably want to try and go a little bit in that way so you can build the telemetry. I don't think they're that great right now.
It's important to think about what's your use case and your LLM application architecture. So certainly if you're using an off-the-shelf solution like a ChatGPT, like a Gemini, like a Copilot, what have you, hey, that's a SaaS service effectively, right? So you're limited by what the vendor is going to give you. Internally, if your teams, your DevOps teams, your engineering teams are building internal functionality, calling the underlying model, GPT, Gemini, Claude, what have you, then, well, what are they doing? They're augmenting it with your proprietary business data using RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Maybe your organization is fine-tuning the model. So depending on where those touch points, those interaction points are, there could be some additional monitoring that takes place. Yesterday, we heard the key word LLM SecOps. That's partly, right, a catch-all, if you will, for understanding, well, what are all of the parts of the process of how Gen AI LLMs are being engineered internal to your organization. So I think the first step would be figuring out, well, yeah, how are you using it? AWS has published something really cool, I think, called the AWS Gen AI Security Scoping Matrix. You guys familiar with this? It is very simple. It defines 5 different scopes of how AI is being used. Check it out. Scope number 1, off the shelf. Scope number 2, enterprise agreement, all the way to scope number 5, training your own models from scratch, which fewer organizations are doing. But depending what use case you're building for, yeah, you're going to have additional telemetry from different areas. Any other questions here in the room? Shaun, there's some comments here that you had the hot take of fortune telling. It's never going to replace a threat analyst, right? And so people are saying, well, hey, well, what about is that from a security perspective or a business perspective, right? And I think you're taking the positive approach is, hey, we're going to have jobs for a long time, but the job is going to change.
Yeah, I would say so. I think all throughout, I've been doing this for a bit, and every time there's like this big change, everyone's like, oh no, I'm gonna we're going to no longer have these jobs. Remember, we went from VMs to a cloud-based system, and people are like, "Oh, I'm not going to be able to build and run my data centers anymore." Well, there's like gigantic data centers everywhere, right? So it's not so much the job is gone; it's just that it's transferred, it's moved, changed a little bit. So I think the threat analyst is spending all their time digging into a bunch of data to try and write a report. They may not have to spend as much time doing that. Maybe you don't need 20 the threat analysts to support that. You might only need 15. But those other 5 people, there are other problems now that has to be fixed. Like the data has to be better normalized. It has to be gathered data in the right place, something else like that. So I think jobs change. I don't think that they're technically going to go away.
Zeolla, you've got a long history on the identity side.
Yeah.
So when we think about identity for AI, for agents, and so on, how should people be handling that?
Oh, I love that question. And it does feed into, I think it was 4 years ago when I first presented here, I was talking about non-human identities, but it was virtual back in 2021. And I think it's going to be a lot of the same. And I know that that can be a boring answer, but I think if folks watched the keynote that, yesterday morning with Diana Kelly, she spoke a lot about how these new and exciting concepts really do boil down to those security basics. And those security basics do boil down to those identity basics. And so when we're thinking about how we're going to manage these new systems that we're adding in, looking back to years ago when we're talking about service principals and application identities, how do we administrate those? How do we ensure that those are secure? And applying those to agents as well and everything there. So I think that when we're looking at it from an identity standpoint, a lot of identity guidance really does, if you map it to something like, there's a new health and fitness trend, and then your doctor, any fitness professional is going to say, that's great. Are you getting sleep? Are you having nutritious meals? Are you, stretching? There are these basics that are going to come back and back again. And, I think that AI isn't a panacea and this new sparkly thing that we all need to chase, but I think it's important to leverage AI for those business discussions to propel folks to do the right thing. And I would also say, if you are an identity person and you're looking to roll out one of those basic changes, using Gen AI as the lubricant for that conversation to get the business to agree and to sign on to it, now's the time.
Yeah, I think we're going to see an explosion in machine identity, where these workloads need to have an identity. But I also think that one of the biggest anti-patterns I see is if I ask an agent to do something, should the agent use its own identity to do that work? Or why wouldn't it use my identity to use that work, right? Because it's like a SQL injection, right? If I perform a SQL injection into a web application and it uses some administrator credential on the back end, it has lots of access and it could do lots of things and bypass things like RLS and whatever. But if it used my access and I actually had access to the database for the information that I should have, then it has a really hard time like escalating or making a mistake and gathering additional information. The number one mistake that I see when people make agents on the IAM side is that they give it its own identity and they use it for too many things. If you're being asked by a user to do something, the user should have access to the data that they're asking you to RAG or whatever. There are many different ways to pass through that identity.
But that's hard. I mean,
It's not easy, yeah.
Identity access management is hard.
Yeah.
And when you want to do it right, it's really hard. And so I think our tools got to get better at making the right way to do things easier. And I don't think we're right there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Sticking with identity just for a moment. So the latest MCP spec says that, hey, you should use OAuth 2.1. Shaun, that's going to solve all the identity problems, right? Is there something, kidding aside, you just mentioned this, propagating the identity. Is there something in the works that's going to help do that when you got agent-to-agent communication?
You had to bring up MCP. Okay, so I have tons of opinions on MCP. I run and manage an MCP server. I've done a lot of operational things. One of the things that I find very interesting about the specification, I think in the keynote yesterday, there was a mention that, look at these dates, November 2024, June 2025, of when these things were being released. Look how new that is. It's way crazier and worse than that. In fact, if you look at some of these specifications, I've spent way too much time reading them and digging into the details. Like the June 2025 specification for MCP points to an RFC that's in draft mode. And that's what it uses, right? That's how this stuff works today. It's like June 2025, it was ratified. Wow, that's new. No, it's not. The things that underpin it aren't even done yet. We could have I don't expect drastic changes, but there could be. I also don't see a lot in these specifications for these sort of like pass-through ideas like we were kind of like talking about earlier. There's, I don't want to call it a train wreck, but I kind of want to call it a train wreck right now. It's very new. It's moving extremely fast. We will learn as we go, but we also need to balance that with stability. We'll see where we go.
Everybody, unfortunately, our time is coming very soon to a close. So one last question for everybody. We'll start with Bailey on the end here. What's the one thing the audience should stop doing today and one thing they should start doing tomorrow to prepare for AI and cloud security?
I would say stop viewing AI as the answer to absolutely everything and get away from that shiny object syndrome. Start focusing on those basics again and leveraging AI as a tool to bring those good security and identity basics back to the forefront of what you're doing and building.
Yeah, I don't know what to stop doing besides what Bailey said. I think to start doing, just try some things in your environment. I mean, just start using it a little bit at a time so you can get familiar with what works and what doesn't.
All right, this is gonna be a spicy take again. Stop complaining about it. It's a little bit inevitable. It's happening, and just my opinion, the conversation where we're saying, "Oh, isn't it so bad? Isn't it so annoying?" is kind of not going anywhere. It's not super productive until you think of it in the kind of like a productive. So I would say kind of like stop complaining, stop taking that like negative tone with it, and think like, all right, well, how can we manage this situation? How can we make this better? And kind of like it's going to happen. It's a little inevitable. I think what should we start doing is, I think I said this earlier, optimize your processes for change. You don't have to use AI for your processes, but optimizing and making it easier to change your processes when AI enters the chat, as we say, whenever AI applies to that scenario, you can better embrace it. And I'm a big fan of like testing it and knowing that it was actually better. Again, going back to data.
For me, stop skipping steps. Like as society today, we're all saying, I just want the easiest solution. Well, what do we have to start doing? Look at what we're saying. Most of the basics haven't changed. Identity is different than incident response, which is different than GRC. So why are we trying to put it all together? Let's understand it better, deep dive, because you have something that can help you deep dive and say, what is it supposed to be like? How do I get here? And how do I break it down to make it work? And each of these can be their own AI solution.
Excellent. Everybody online, let's give the virtual round of applause to our panelists. Everybody here in person, hey.